Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're plunging into a truly dense and pretty provocative set of sources.
Yeah.
Excerpts from a document called Illuminati '03 Satanic Possession Makow, Henry PhD.pdf. And this is a deep dive into claims that, well, they're going to challenge a lot of conventional understandings, history, society, even human nature itself.
Absolutely.
We're going to be exploring some really extraordinary assertions about hidden forces allegedly at play in our world, specifically, as presented in this document.
Indeed. And our mission today, really, is to unpack the intricate and, let's be honest, often startling assertions laid out in this material.
Yeah.
It presents a really comprehensive, almost all-encompassing worldview. It alleges this hidden global power structure, orchestrating major world events, shaping profound societal shifts.
Right.
So we'll be exploring the key arguments and what the document presents as evidence. We want to help you, our listener, grasp the specific viewpoints within this material without, of course, endorsing them in any way.
Definitely not.
Our goal is simply to lay out what this source claims, let you understand its unique and, often controversial perspective on things.
That's right. So let's unpack this then. What exactly does this source claim is shaping our world? And what kind of world is it describing? What's the basic premise here? Right. The core allegation. A secret satanic cult's dominance. Okay, so the document opens with what it calls an overture. It sets a pretty dramatic stage, actually. It describes a scenario that sounds, and it uses these words, like the script for a 50s science fiction movie.
Right.
Where humanity has allegedly been taken over by a satanic cult. Now, this isn't presented as something you can easily see.
No, it's hidden.
Exactly. The source claims this cult operates through, deep-seated fear and coercion, wielding its power behind the scenes. And here's where it gets particularly unsettling. The document makes the claim, quite disturbing, that political leaders, even at the highest levels, are supposedly sexually blackmailed to ensure loyalty.
Wow. So not just influence, but direct coercion through blackmail.
That's what it claims. And not just as an isolated tactic, It's presented as systemic, an insidious method of control, ensuring complicity from those in power.
And what's really striking about this alleged operation is the claim of, simultaneous visibility and secrecy.
How so?
Well, the source asserts that while the cult's symbols, things like phallic monuments, pyramids are supposedly everywhere, embedded seemingly innocuously in public spaces, architecture, even corporate logos.
Right, you see those symbols mentioned a lot in these kinds of texts.
Exactly, but its actual name is rarely mentioned. This paradoxical presence, according to the document, leads to widespread cognitive dissonance among people.
Meaning
People sense something's wrong, like a disconnect, but they can't quite pin it down. They can't connect these scattered symbols to a single hidden force.
I see.
And the material goes even further. It alleges society is under constant psychic attack by the mass media.
Psychic attack.
Yeah, claiming the media deliberately distracts and manipulates the public, ensuring the real orchestrators are never acknowledged. The author paints this vivid picture of humanity as a kind of blind and deaf giant being led astray by what it calls demons.
Okay, so if that's the setup, this hidden cult, blackmail, psychic attacks, what's the alleged cult actually doing? What's the goal?
Well, Thorse is remarkably direct about that and sweeping in its claims.
Go on.
It asserts, and I'm quoting here,
Yeah.
Illuminati bankers are destroying the institutions of Christian civilization, religion, God, race, nation, and family in order to induct humanity into their satanic cult.
So it's not just control, it's transformation, a complete overhaul.
A dismantling of traditional structures,
Yeah.
The document explicitly claims these bankers have instigated and financed wars to destroy the nations.
Using wars as tools.
Effectively, yes.
Yeah.
Tools of their agenda. And furthermore, it states they've hyped the authors that spread alienation and disillusionment, suggesting a deliberate manipulation of culture, of intellectual movements, to sow discord and despair. So the real conflict, as presented here, isn't the stuff we see on the news, the sort of staged diversions. It's an epic struggle. Illuminati versus humanity.
That's quite a claim. So if this is such a grand scheme, how, according to the source, do they keep such a tight grip? How does it work?
The document posits that humanity is essentially held prisoner by their mind control.
Mind control, okay.
And it puts huge emphasis on the media, highlighting that mass media is controlled by a handful of corporations with occult symbols in their logos.
Ah, the logos again.
Yeah, suggesting this deliberate pervasive influence over information, public perception, even, thought itself.
So it's not just presenting a problem then?
No, it's also offering a call to action. It urges what it calls the sleeping masses to wake up and expose its participants and their foul deeds.
Oh.
Well, it cites specific high-profile events, things like 9/11 and including Newtown and Boston, as examples where leaders in mass media are alleged to be complicit in mass murder and cover-up, implying these events were orchestrated, basically, to serve this Illuminati agenda.
That's a huge accusation.
It is. The material suggests the Illuminati needs legitimacy to function, implying that if you expose them widely, you strip away that essential power.
And what about resistance? Does it suggest how people should resist?
It does mention one thing specifically. It posits that gun ownership is the main reason Americans are still relatively free.
Interesting. So armed preparedness as a deterrent.
It seems to suggest a kind of peaceful resistance, but backed by the preparedness to defend oneself, a crucial deterrent against this alleged control structure.
Okay. And central to all of this is the term satanic possession. The document tries to define that, right? It's not just like horror movie stuff.
Exactly. It's presented more theologically, almost. The source claims that sin is seeking happiness outside your soul-God relationship.
Okay.
And then it explicitly defines that act as the real meaning of the false satanic possession.
So seeking fulfillment in the wrong places is possession in this view.
That's the argument. It's a reinterpretation of a fundamental concept. And it goes on to broadly categorize a whole range of beliefs: paganism, secularism, Luciferianism, humanism, or the occult as essentially all Kabbalah.
All Kabbalah, what does that mean in this context?
It implies they're all variations or extensions of this core, hidden, controlling ideology. The argument is that modern Western civilization lacks moral legitimacy, precisely because it's based on what the source sees as a fundamental rebellion against God.
Right.
It ultimately portrays humanity as having been hijacked by psychopaths intent on torching the old order and building a bizarre, solipsistic, violent, depraved dystopia.
It's a comprehensive spiritual and moral critique woven directly into this overarching conspiracy theory, suggesting a complete inversion of, well, everything.
Of natural and divine order, exactly. 2. The alleged architect, Kabbalism and Jewish Messianism. Okay, so moving deeper into where this alleged control comes from, this source makes some very striking and, frankly, highly controversial claims, especially regarding Kabbalism and what it calls Jewish Messianism.
Right, this seems central to its argument.
It starts with the assertion that Judaism is a satanic cult masquerading as a religion, which is, a profoundly inflammatory statement.
Extremely.
But then it immediately adds a crucial caveat from its perspective that most Jews and Christian Zionists are dupes, unaware of this supposed real agenda.
Okay, so it tries to differentiate between leadership and followers.
It seems so. It goes on to state that Kabbalist Jewish leadership replaces God using the nation of Israel as Trojan horse, arguing that this alleged denial or supplanting of God is the hallmark of Satanism. And it contrasts what it calls true religion, where God is knowable, with Kabbalah's assertion that God is unknowable and has no form, linking this abstract idea of an unknowable God to Satanism and an agenda to remake the world in a perverse image. Basically, a world without God's influence.
It's really constructing a specific theological argument here to support the conspiracy narrative.
Exactly. Reinterpreting fundamental religious concepts to fit its framework of this hidden malevolent force.
Yeah, that's a huge claim to unpack. Does the source try to give it historical context? Through its own lens, of course.
It does. It points to a specific period, roughly 1050 to 1650. Claiming that during this time, Judaism was regarded as a satanic cult and Jews were considered agents of the devil.
Okay, referring to historical anti-Semitism.
Well, it frames it differently. It suggests that alongside what it calls a historical Jewish persecution complex, Christians back then held a parallel fear, a fear that Jews hated them and conspired to destroy Christendom. A central part of this alleged fear, according to the source, was the belief that the awaited Jewish Messiah was actually the Antichrist, poised for a global overthrow.
Right.
The document quotes a source talking about a terrible, mysterious Jewish horde hidden somewhere in the East, waiting for a signal to pour out upon Christendom and annihilate it.
Wow.
And it states that Jews were accused of various crimes back then: collusion with Mongols, desecrating churches, murdering infants, spreading poisons, practicing what it calls infamous sexual perversities. all stemming, it says, from the medieval view that, as Satan's agents, nothing was beyond the depraved and evil nature of the Jews.
Okay, so it's citing historical accusations, framing them as evidence of a long-standing conflict or perception.
Yes, and connecting this to the bigger picture, the source tries to trace what it labels Jewish imperialism.
Jewish imperialism.
Yeah. It draws on a 1923 Hebrew Weekly article, which is presented as prophetic by Léon de Ponsin, who the source calls a French Catholic journalist. This article supposedly claims that Jewry is the only truly cosmopolitan people, and therefore must act as a dissolver of any distinction of race and of nationality.
A dissolver.
Yes. And the great ideal of Judaism, as interpreted by the source through this article, is presented as the entire world eventually being imbued with Jewish teaching, leading to a universal brotherhood of nations, which is, quote, in reality, a vaster Judaism where all the separate races and religions will disappear.
And the source calls that imperialism.
It labels it Jewish imperialism, which intends to govern and enslave the world. Yeah. It also cites someone named Elie Fair, identified as a Jew, who allegedly wrote about the Jewish people seeing themselves chosen not for an afterlife, but specifically for dominion over the world.
So it's building this case for a historical, religiously motivated drive for global control.
That's the core assertion, forming the alleged historical motivation for the whole conspiracy it describes.
Okay, here's where it gets, well, even more complex, according to this narrative. To achieve this goal, this Jewish imperialism, the document asserts that it is necessary to abolish Christianity, which represents an insurmountable obstacle.
Why Christianity specifically?
Well, the source explains that until Jesus Christ, Israel's position was, in its view, clear, destined to govern the world. But Christ, by spiritualizing and universalizing, God's promises extending them beyond just the Jews to everyone, represented a renunciation of a monopoly.
Ah, okay. A challenge to exclusivity.
Exactly. A challenge to that monopoly on divine favor and a universal mission. This, the source states, created a total and definitive rupture, making a collision now inevitable between these two worldviews.
So it pits them against each other fundamentally.
Yeah, it presents the idea that if the Jew is right, Christianity is nothing but an illusion, and vice versa, positioning Christianity as a fundamental threat to this specific interpretation of Jewish Messianism, suggesting this deep-seated antagonism is key to the whole alleged conspiracy.
Right. And this brings us to the alleged mechanics of this Jewish world dominion through something the source explicitly calls the Kabbalah hoax.
A hoax. How does it define that?
It claims the Kabbalah itself is a hoax, largely based on a text called the Zohar. It specifically alleges the Zohar was falsely attributed to Rabbi Simeon ben Yochai, basically for profit.
Okay.
The source notes that early scholarly Sephardic Jewish leaders apparently dismissed the Zohar as a hoax initially. They even banned it because they saw its ideas as heretical and dangerous.
But it became mainstream eventually, right?
According to the document, yes. The ban was allegedly lifted around 1540, and Kabbalah then became mainstream. And the reason for this shift, the source claims, was specifically to underpin belief in the arrival of the Messiah, and with it, Jewish world dominion.
So it's tying a historical religious development directly to this alleged conspiratorial agenda.
Precisely.
So does the source point to key figures in this who supposedly pushed this hoax for that agenda?
It does. It states that Sabbatai Zevi, back in 1666, announced he was the Messiah and preached what it calls a Satanic doctrine, summed up in the phrase, "Praise be he who permits the forbidden."
Permits the forbidden. What's the logic there, according to the source?
The reasoning presented is, well, bizarre. It claims the idea was that doing good keeps the universe too balanced, slowing God's return. Therefore, sin is virtue because it creates imbalance and hastens God's return.
That sounds like a complete inversion.
Exactly. The source frames it as the essence of Satanism, a fundamental inversion of good and evil, a deliberate subversion of traditional morality.
And Zevi wasn't the only one.
No, the document claims Jacob Frank, an 18th century figure, took up this torch, leading to the Sabbatine Frankists, who it alleges then spawned the Illuminati.
Ah, so there's the link to the Illuminati name.
Yes, that's the alleged lineage. The document concludes this section pretty bluntly, stating unequivocally that the Kabbalah is a hoax, but one which governs our deluded and degenerate society. It asserts that for the Kabbalist, good and evil are relative, so evil is an illusion, a concept the source links directly to a moral vacuum. And while it does acknowledge that not everyone who studies Kabbalah becomes a Satanist, It insists Kabbalah is a prerequisite for all Luciferian practitioners.
So it's redefining these spiritual paths entirely to fit its narrative of control.
A comprehensive redefinition, yes. 3. The orchestrated subversion of society and culture.
Okay, so if this is the alleged grand plan rooted in Kabbalism and this idea of Jewish Messianism, how does the source claim it actually shows up, in our daily lives, in broader society?
Right. The document moves into what it calls the orchestrated subversion of society and culture. And it starts specifically with the sexual revolution and its alleged perversion.
Perversion? How does it define that?
Very broadly, actually. Anything deviating from what it considers natural and healthy. It then claims the Illuminati deliberately sold sex for its own sake as free love and sexual liberation, which it explicitly labels a satanic inversion. The argument here is that this sexual liberation was designed to weaken marriage by normalizing promiscuity.
Okay.
And to dehumanize people by promoting physical intimacy without human intimacy, basically severing the emotional and spiritual bonds of traditional relationships.
And does it get specific about impacts?
Oh, yes. Particularly striking are the claims about the alleged impact on gender roles and identity.
Such as?
The force claims that young women have been reprogrammed to be self-seeking by feminism, asserting this leaves them with nothing to offer but their bodies, transforming them into sluts and would-be porn stars.
That's harsh language.
Extremely. And it describes this transformation as both perversion and satanic possession. A core assertion in the document is this idea of an insidious psychological war on heterosexuality, marriage, and family.
A war on heterosexuality.
That's the claim. It says that homosexuality was a developmental disorder, but is now being actively promoted, that transgender confusion encouraged, all as part of this broader subversion.
And it doesn't stop there, does it?
No. The document then chillingly suggests that bestiality and pedophilia are next in this New World Order effort.
Seriously?
Yeah. It cites the furries subculture as a supposed stepping stone to bestiality. It talks about their costumes, mentions yiffing, which is sexual role play in that community, and even tries to link them to Disney animals, suggesting deliberate conditioning from childhood.
That's quite a leap. And disturbing. Does it try to back this up further?
Well, it delves into interpretations of the Talmud here, making some truly disturbing and, again, highly controversial allegations to support its claims about sexual subversion.
Like what? And again, we have to stress these are the source's interpretations.
Absolutely.
Oh.
The source claims the Talmud teaches unnatural intercourse does not cause a woman to be forbidden to marry a high priest, presented as a distorted morality. More graphically, it asserts that baby boys may always be used as subjects for sodomy by grown men, and that sodomy and intercourse with babies is the prerogative of the adult Talmudic man.
That's horrific. And widely disputed, right?
Completely disputed. These are interpretations widely rejected as gross misrepresentations and classic anti-Semitic tropes by mainstream Jewish scholarship and, frankly, most people. But the document cites specific rulings on intercourse with beasts and young children from rabbinic texts, interpreting them as a systematic deformation of Scripture by the Pharisees, which it alleges forms the basis for these perversions. It's all framed as a direct, deliberate part of the broader perversion agenda orchestrated by this alleged cult.
It's crucial we emphasize these are the source's claims and interpretations, which are extremely contentious.
Absolutely essential. So, moving from that, what role does the source claim Sigmund Freud played in all this, in this alleged satanic possession and sexual subversion?
Right, Freud comes up.
The document directly connects Freud and his alleged B'nai B'rith, Illuminati backers, to the idea that sexual desire, libido, is the primary motivation of human life, and that sexual satisfaction is the universal panacea.
So, promoting libido as the key driver.
Exactly. Claiming he taught that repressing sexual urges is harmful leads to neuroses, psychological issues, thereby encouraging unbridled expression. The source characterizes Freud's Oedipus complex, the idea of children having sexual feelings for opposite-sex parents, as basically an overture to incest and pedophilia, suggesting it normalized or paved the way for such things.
Wow. Does it link Freud to Kabbalah, too?
It does. It suggests Freud discussed Kabbalah with a rabbi in 1920 and was a follower of Sabbatai Zevi, linking him to that alleged lineage we discussed earlier.
Okay.
It claims Freud joined the Masonic Jewish Lodge, B'nai B'rith, due to many dark emotional forces and the clear consciousness of our inner identity, framing his motivations firmly within its conspiratorial context.
And the critique of Freud doesn't stop there, does it? Psychoanalysis itself is targeted.
Not at all. It characterizes psychoanalysis as a scam and a form of mind control, alleging that clients' personal details, divulged in therapy, could be weaponized against them by the Illuminati.
Weaponized?
Yeah. It claims Freud saw his clients as suckers and uses a really disturbing comparison, claiming he viewed them similarly to Negroes and that his mood depended on earnings from these suckers.
That's incredibly offensive language it attributes to him.
Yes, it is. The document asserts psychoanalysis was designed to give rich people absolution for their guilty pleasures and permission to proceed. Basically, a moral bypass for the elite.
And it even gets personal about Freud.
Extremely. It states his personal life allegedly mirrored his theories, citing an alleged affair with his wife's sister who became pregnant, and claiming his theories were just an attempt to exonerate himself from his own alleged sins. It even draws a parallel to Adam Weishaupt, the alleged Illuminati organizer, who the source also claims got his sister-in-law pregnant, suggesting a pattern among these alleged subversives.
Okay, so if that's the alleged psychological and sexual subversion, how does it translate into broader cultural control through media and education?
Right. The source claims the mass media and education system have been systematically subverted by a satanic secret society, the Illuminati.
To do what?
With the express purpose of promoting a perversion of reality and morality. This includes, according to the document, suppressing truth, actively pushing falsehoods, and consistently portraying negative or self-destructive behavior in a positive light, thereby warping societal norms and values.
And Hollywood gets specific attention here, doesn't it?
Oh yes, heavily criticized. Films, it claims, aren't just entertainment. They're home movies that spread Hollywood Jewish nightmare.
Jewish nightmare.
That's the term used, promoting dysfunction, vulgarity, and what it calls an adolescent obsession with bodily functions.
Does it name specific films?
It does. Mainstream films like Knocked Up, This Is 40, Breakfast at Tiffany's, A Touch of Class, all cited as examples of this socially destructive agitprop.
Agitprop.
Yeah. It argues these movies, often made by people it identifies as Illuminati Jews, aim to normalize obscenity, legitimized abortion and prostitution, and systematically undermine marriage by promoting promiscuity and chaos. The claim is they're not just reflecting culture, but actively engineering it towards a perverse end.
And the education system is implicated too.
Absolutely. Presented as a key instrument of this alleged cultural control. It brings up cases like Benjamin Levin, former Ontario Deputy Minister of Education, who faced child pornography charges.
Okay.
The source claims Levin drafted a sex education program for Ontario kids that allegedly included gender identity in grade 1 and oral and anal sex by grade 7, describing this as concrete evidence of a Masonic, Kabbalist, Jewish, satanic sex cult controlling society through schools.
That's a very specific and serious accusation linking personal misconduct to systemic control.
Very. Similarly, it depicts Manitoba's anti-bullying action plan as a coercive law to persecute students who object to homosexuality, framing it as ensuring children are groomed for homosexual pedophiles. That's the term it uses. It labels gay-straight alliances as trysting places designed to encourage gay sexual experimentation, and states this whole initiative is a vicious, underhanded attack on our identity, disguised as homosexual rights. While framing opposition as homophobia, it asserts the real agenda practices heterophobia.
So, complete inversion of intent, according to the source.
Exactly. And it even claims there's a deliberate defense of pedophiles and widespread judicial complicity within this alleged system.
How does it argue that?
It highlights a professor, James Kincaid, who allegedly downplayed the negatives of pedophilia while promoting the positives of seeing children erotically to an applauding audience.
Right.
The document suggests society is being systematically conditioned, where abhorrent and irrational things are said by socially accepted people, causing profound cognitive dissonance in the population, making them unable to process the moral implications.
Cognitive dissonance again.
Yes. It recounts a disturbing anecdote, a mother losing custody of her son after he claimed his father's gay lover was massaging him, with the judge allegedly ordering the son to get used to a homosexual lifestyle and denying contact with the mother.
That's a shocking story, presented as fact by the source.
Presented as fact, yes. And finally, the case of Lori Douglas, a Manitoba Associate Chief Justice, who allegedly hid posing for pornographic photos. This is presented as a prime example of Winnipeg's Masonic elite protecting a degenerate to show Masonic control of the justice system, claiming she was appointed because she posed for porn, not despite it, as a demonstration of power.
So these individual cases are framed as proof of a much larger hidden system of control and corruption.
That's precisely how the source uses them. 4. The mechanisms of control and historical orchestration. Okay, connecting this back to the really big picture, the alleged global control. The source heavily emphasizes financial dominion as the absolute foundation.
The money trail.
Pretty much. It posits that the mainspring of Illuminati power is the Masonic Jewish central banking cartel that controls government credit worldwide, claiming they can literally create money out of nothing.
Right, the central banking critique.
And this power, the ability to create money at will, leads the document to state that they therefore think they are God, assuming absolute authority over the economic fate of nations. The document argues that Jewish Messianism, the belief, as the source interprets it, that a king of the Jews from the Rothschild family will one day rule the world, is the core ideology behind the push for a new world order.
The Rothschilds, specifically.
Yes. It asserts that the Messianic hope promises the establishment by the Jews of world power in Palestine, and that this Messiah is meant to be selected from the ranks of the Rothschild family, implying a dynastic, predetermined global leadership.
So this alleged financial power is tied to a specific long-term strategy.
Exactly. Control. The Rothschilds, and by extension this banking cartel, are said to bend the nations to their will by means of debt. End quote. Effectively ensnaring governments and populations in perpetual servitude.
Through debt.
Yes. This source explicitly links this to a principle from Deuteronomy. Thou shalt lend unto many nations, but thou shalt not borrow. Presenting that as the alleged biblical justification for their financial dominance. The document then expands this claim significantly, asserting that the Jewish conspiracy isn't just one element, but is the British Empire, is the American Empire, and is the New World Order. All founded, it claims, on the immense financial power of the London-based central banking cartel.
That's a very broad equation. British Empire, American Empire is the central bank's bank of having accepted and stored Nazi plunder.
That's the equation the source draws. It even accuses the Bank for International Settlements, BIS, the central bank's bank, of having accepted and stored Nazi plunder, and alleges a BIS president confirmed WWII was basically a charade orchestrated to reposition Germany for the banker New World Order by keeping secret contacts with German financiers during the war.
Wow. Okay. So if finance is the foundation, how does this alleged power translate into political subversion? It mentions Freemasonry and intelligence agencies.
Right. The document describes Freemasonry as Kabbalism for Gentiles and explicitly calls it a Jewish institution, claiming lower-level Masons are deliberately kept in the dark about Freemasonry's devil worship and embrace of homosexuality.
Kept in the dark.
That's the assertion. It claims Freemasonry functions as an efficient private intelligence network designed to ruin a man by meticulously collecting personal data on areas of vulnerability, financial problems, social vice, any guilty secret.
How would they use that?
The tactics allegedly include Masonic police harassing people or planting evidence, solicitors causing endless delays in court cases, Masons in powerful positions ensuring enemies are dismissed or denied promotions. It paints this picture of a pervasive, hidden system of control and punishment.
A sort of shadow network.
Exactly. And this alleged infiltration, according to the source, goes right to the top. It claims that historically, a remarkably high percentage of U.S. Congress members, cabinet officials, even presidents like Truman, FDR, Harding, were Freemasons, suggesting a widespread conspiracy to give its members unfair and even criminal advantages. Furthermore, the source explicitly links major intelligence services, CIA, MI6, Mossad as alleged Illuminati instruments, serving the Illuminati agenda, which is world communism.
World communism. Interesting link there.
Yeah. The CIA, for instance, is claimed to have actively promoted modern abstract art as cultural engineering to undermine tradition, and specifically implicates Gloria Steinem and feminism as CIA creations for cultural subversion.
Okay. And MI6.
Accused of deliberately sabotaging Allied war efforts. It cites the Prosper Network betrayal in France by a homosexual Freemason, Sir Claude Edward Marjoribanks Danzy, allegedly done to destroy Europe's Gentile best and weaken national identities.
That's a very specific and damning claim about WWII sabotage.
Very. And disturbingly, the source makes this sweeping, inflammatory claim that 95% of the world's terror, including 9/11, can be traced to this source via the world's intelligence services, especially the CIA, Mossad, and MI6.
Basically accusing them of being the source of most terrorism.
That's the direct accusation.
Yeah.
Suggesting they're the primary orchestrators.
Okay. Continuing on this theme of orchestration, the document talks about orchestrated wars and false flags as core methods, right?
Yes. Central mechanisms of control.
Mm.
It quotes Marine General Smedley Butler, saying he was essentially a high-class muscle man for big business, for Wall Street and the bankers, describing how wars fundamentally benefit financial interests, not national security.
Right. War is a racket.
Exactly. World War I, for example, is presented as a needless war, concocted by Illuminati, with Freemasons allegedly controlling both sides, citing figures like Lord Robert Cecil, Rothschild, Milner on the British side. The source even cites Max Nordau, claiming he predicted WWI back in 1903 as a necessary step towards a free and Jewish Palestine, linking the war directly to that alleged Jewish messianic agenda.
So, seeing major historical events through this very specific conspiratorial lens, what about World War II? That often features heavily in these narratives.
It certainly does here. Hitler's repeatedly claimed to be an Illuminati agent and traitor who allegedly colluded with Stalin and Churchill.
Colluded, so not really enemies.
According to the source, no. His mission, allegedly, wasn't to win for Germany, but to extinguish the German spirit and discredit everything he represented, especially race and nation. Why? To prevent any future nationalist movements that might challenge the Illuminati's global agenda.
That's a radical reinterpretation.
Extremely. The document brings up claims of Hitler's alleged escape to Argentina in 1945, saying it was covered up by the FBI and Soviets, citing supposed witnesses and suppressed info.
The escape narrative, okay.
It even cites Hitler's supposed deliberate blunders, like not supporting nuclear weapons development, or halting the tanks at Dunkirk as evidence he was a traitor, intentionally sabotaging his own war effort.
Blunders as proof of intent.
That's the argument. The source also, quite disturbingly, discusses claims of Hitler's alleged sexual perversions, a bisexual love triangle, forcing his niece, Jelly Robol, into sickening acts, tying this back to his alleged psychopathy as a trait shared by these Illuminati agents.
Wow, okay. Does the source claim other wars were orchestrated too?
Yes. The scope extends beyond the world wars. The Korean War, for instance, described as another Illuminati fraud, an artificially contrived war designed to empower world government through the UN.
How so?
And to effectively disenfranchise the U.S. Congress from its power to declare war. General Douglas MacArthur's dismissal for actually pursuing victory in Korea is cited as explicit proof. Proof that, from the Illuminati perspective, victory had become an anachronism. The war wasn't meant to be won, just used.
Used to consolidate global power and weaken nations.
That's the claim. Weakening national sovereignty.
Okay, moving into more recent history, 9/11. How does the source frame that? I called it a false flag earlier.
Yes, presented as a definitive false flag event. A pivotal moment in this alleged conspiracy. It cites Edward Hendry's book, claiming 9/11 was a fraud and act of treason perpetrated against the American people, and it attributes direct blame to Israeli Mossad as the orchestrators.
Mossad again. What specific claims does it make about the event itself?
Some startling ones. That no planes hit the Twin Towers or the Pentagon. That the images shown were computer-generated.
No planes, computer-generated images. That's very far from the official account.
Very far. It alleges eyewitnesses presented by the media were actually media employees, and that the BBC reported WTC-7's collapse a full 20 minutes before it actually happened, implying foreknowledge.
The WTC-7 claim is common in these stories. How does it explain the tower's collapse?
Not by impact or fire. It attributes it to a direct energy weapon, allegedly linked to Hurricane Aaron and HARP, which is often cited in conspiracy theories as a weather or mind control tech.
A directed energy weapon. Okay. And the purpose of 9/11, according to the source?
To create a Zionist police state and to justify wars against Iraq, Afghanistan, and Iran. It specifically links the Iraq war to Saddam Hussein deciding to stop trading oil in dollars, thus challenging the alleged financial dominance.
So, geopolitical and financial motives behind the alleged false flag.
That's the argument presented. Finally, the document discusses assassinations as tools within this larger framework.
Who does it focus on?
Heavily on JFK's assassination, claiming he was murdered by the CIA and Mossad because he determined to make peace with Russia and Cuba, a move that would have allegedly thwarted the Illuminati's agenda of perpetual conflict.
Peace as a threat to the agenda.
Yes. It further alleges that Mary Pinchot Meyer, JFK's lover, who reportedly experimented with LSD and sought to turn on powerful men to prevent war, was also supposedly murdered by the CIA to silence her.
Silenced for trying to influence leaders towards peace.
That's the claim. The source explicitly states the CIA ultimately answers to the Masonic Jewish world banking cartel, and that these assassinations, JFK, Mary Meyer, were designed to stop idealistic leaders from impeding their agenda of constant war and ever-increasing debt, which serves their financial dominion. V. Re-engineering humanity and the erosion of being.
Okay, so if those are the alleged mechanisms, finance, politics, war, assassination, what does the source claim is the ultimate effect? On us, on humanity itself?
Right, it gets into what it calls re-engineering humanity and the erosion of being, starting with the erosion of truth and God consciousness.
How does it define that?
It asserts that the pervasive idea that truth is relative and cannot be known is satanic, because from its perspective, God is absolute truth.
So relativism equals satanic?
In this view, yes. It claims that removing God from our lives creates a spiritual vacuum, which is then quickly filled by material desires, making people willing servants to these manipulative forces.
And what about humanism? That often comes up.
It does. Humanism, often seen as positive, focused on human flourishing, is portrayed here as the religion of man, or worship of humanity. But ultimately, the document claims it's just a ruse to re-engineer him according to elite specifications, intended to establish a totalitarian society where humans are just cogs.
Re-engineering, that leads into the next point, right? The animalization of humanity.
Exactly. Described as a deliberate process. It presents a theory of naturalism as actively erasing the line between spirit and matter by pretending spirit doesn't exist, thereby characterizing people in purely animal terms, focusing almost solely on base bodily functions and instincts.
Animal terms, how does it illustrate that?
It uses this extended, rather vivid analogy of cohabiting with a monkey, specifically mentioning Curious George.
Curious George.
Yeah. To represent human beings as mere ape vehicles driven mainly by base instincts, sex obsession, schadenfreude, joy in others' misfortune, greed. And these instincts, it claims, are corrupted, programmed from a very young age through societal conditioning.
So we're being programmed to be base.
That's the argument. It paints a picture where porn, violence, greed, etc. are pushed in his face. People rarely get accurate information or positive role models, leaving them susceptible to this animalization.
And this animalization, according to the source, changes how we view temptation.
Yes, it claims the very concept of temptation is presented as outmoded. The document argues society has been deliberately disarmed, made vulnerable to constant appeals of money, sex, food, material things, power, fame.
Disarmed how?
It claims we're like Eve in the garden, subjected to temptation 24/7. But the key difference, as presented here, is that the concept of temptation has been so thoroughly abolished or reframed that people can't even discern what's good, evil, or self-destructive anymore.
And that serves the controllers.
It implies so. A dissatisfied people are pawns in our game of world conquest, whereas if people served God, they couldn't be controlled by these external forces. That's the logic presented. So how does this alleged re-engineering impact fundamental things like gender and family? The source has a section called The End of Women.
Yes, it does. It claims Illuminati social engineers have systematically undermined gender and marriage with the complicity of government, media, education, all the usual suspects in this narrative.
Undermined.
It argues women were designed by nature to sacrifice and surrender for family, embodying traditional roles. But feminism, according to the source, taught them to be strong and independent, leading, paradoxically, it claims, to a lack of fulfillment because their natural biological instincts are wrong under this new paradigm.
So feminism is presented as unnatural and harmful to women themselves.
That's the assertion. It states, women have been empowered and men emasculated with the explicit purpose to neuter and re-engineer humanity as a slave race.
Neuter humanity.
Yeah. Masculinity is defined simply as power, and men are advised to lead in relationships, be the boss to earn respect. Otherwise, they become like a brother or son to their partner, indicating a subversion of what the source sees as natural gender dynamics.
Right. And finally, this alleged subversion targets children directly.
Yes, the most vulnerable. The document describes events like We Day, those youth empowerment events, as Illuminati communist recruitment and brainwashing pure and simple.
We Day as recruitment. How?
It claims kids attending are drafted into a cadre and then channeled into any number of Illuminati causes. It points to the event's logo and hand sign, claiming they match occult symbols from Lovecraft's Necronomicon, the as above, so below maxim.
Occult symbols at a youth event.
That's the interpretation. It also notes a professor making the Hebrew shin hand sign, seeing these as covert signals. It claims the event uses the guise of charity and social good to twist their sincere efforts in favor of their satanic agenda, creating a nameless sense of grievance without suggesting real solutions, making kids receptive to their influence.
So even positive-seeming initiatives are framed as manipulation. What about education more broadly?
Well, complementing this alleged indoctrination, the source highlights the decline of grammar.
Decline of grammar. How does that fit?
It's presented as a disturbing sign of cultural decline and an indicator of broader cultural disintegration driven by this subversive force. The inability to write a proper sentence, even among educated people, isn't seen as accidental, but as an intentional erosion of order and clarity.
Intentional.
Yeah. It suggests flouting the rules of grammar is treated like another form of liberation and revolt, correlating this disregard for structure with what it calls a satanic era where the laws of God and nature are distorted and reversed.
So breaking grammar rules is like breaking moral laws in this view.
That seems to be the argument. If fundamental rules of language, like math, are challenged, it's part of a broader suspension of reality promoted by these alleged controllers to make people more pliable.
Outro. So what does this all mean? I mean, we've just taken a really deep dive into an extraordinary and pretty sweeping narrative presented in these sources.
Yeah.
It claims to reveal this hidden structure of global control influencing, well, everything. Finance, politics, our personal lives, even our most fundamental relationships.
The author paints a vivid, definitely disturbing picture of a world where almost every aspect of society, financial systems, education, culture, is being systematically subverted by a secretive, powerful entity with a very specific long-term agenda.
Indeed. The material presents a highly unified, incredibly detailed theory, a world orchestrated by powerful, secretive entities with very specific goals. It asserts that major historical events, contemporary social trends, they're not accidental,
Right.
but rather carefully planned components of a long-term blueprint to reshape humanity, establish a new global order. The claims touch on everything from, the alleged origins of modern banking to the very nature of human identity and spirituality, weaving this tapestry of interconnected conspiracies.
It certainly paints a comprehensive, if profoundly unsettling, picture. In this deep dive, it was about exploring the claims, the perspectives within the provided source material, allowing you, our listener, to understand the arguments the author puts forth. We've laid out the assertions as they appear in the text, from alleged motivations of secret societies to their claimed methods of cultural, historical manipulation, including, some very sensitive and controversial content, always presenting it as the source's viewpoint, never our endorsement.
Absolutely. And this raises, I think, an important question. Given the sheer scope, the extensive nature of the alleged conspiracies and hidden agendas outlined here, claims touching nearly every facet of human experience, historical events, often presenting a completely inverted view of reality. How might one critically assess such sweeping narratives, such claims about reality, about human agency? How do you navigate claims of this magnitude without either just dismissing complex issues outright or, on the other hand, falling prey to unverified, potentially harmful narratives?
Yeah.
Certainly gives you a lot to consider, doesn't it?
Yeah.
About how you process information, how you construct your own understanding of the world around you.
A lot to consider, as always. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.